All right, I want to ask you, when the war broke out in Europe, what was the reaction in the United States?
World War II.
World War II.
Well, the American people were kind of, there was a mixed group. There was an English-German group that sided with Hitler. A lot of wealthy people were on Hitler's side. They were saying we can't stand with these socialists and these, I don't think they were communists quite, but they didn't want to do any business with the socialists, and so they stuck with Hitler for a while. And it was, I think, the Kennedy family in some way were pro-Hitler for a while. It was a very terrible, terrible time. The country was split. What was it?
Lindbergh was.
Lindbergh was. Oh yes. There was who would be the president of City College? You know, in those days, City College was virtually a Jewish college, very large but virtually Jewish. Now I forget the name of the president.
Robinson.
Robinson, thank you. Robinson was the president, and one day he flew over Germany when Hitler was really going gung-ho. Robinson flew over in an airplane, and when he returned to the United States, I think there was an article in the Times saying, everything is fine there. I looked over there, everything was peaceful. Yes, from 5,000 feet or 10,000 feet, everything was peaceful. And they made a lot of fun of, they made fun of him as a president, but he was a college president, more or less pro-Hitler. And of course, Lindbergh was definitely pro-Hitler. He was archly pro-Hitler. So we had, the country was kind of split that way. But once England got involved, once they began to bash a thing, and the strange thing was, everybody was amazed about the French defeat. Now, if I remember correctly, France was defeated in about 30 days. But we were told for years before that, we were told they have a Maginot Line. It is just below the surface of the border of France, facing Germany. And the Maginot Line had every sophisticated device with sophisticated cannons and little railroad cars going in and out. And they were impregnable. Nobody could break through that Maginot Line. Well, the Germans didn't even try. They went around down towards the Low Countries, Belgium and countries like that, and they went around the Maginot Line. And in less than, I think in about one month, they defeated the French, the best trained army in the world, the French army. They lost it in about a month. It was really a disgraceful thing. That's what makes me worry now about what we hear in Congress, with all these new congressmen coming in. They're all screaming, we got to have a lot of money, we got to buy more munitions, we got to defend ourselves, got to defend ourselves. And yet, I have sent dozens of letters to these people asking them, defend yourself against whom? I said, what little I learned in the Army, I learned one thing. That before you start defending yourself, you got to know who your enemy is. And then you got to say to yourself, you got to plan how we're going to defend ourselves against the enemy. What can he throw at us? Knowing what he can throw at us, we can defend ourselves, and then we can counterattack. Not a single new Republican, or for that matter, Dole didn't answer, Gingrich didn't answer, none of them.
We're not discussing.
They would not. They would not discuss these things. To this day, I don't know who the enemy is.
All right, what did you hear about the Battle of Britain?
The Battle of Britain was a very interesting battle. What little we heard of was that when the Germans began to send their V-2s over into Britain, it was a terrible thing, because these rockets would come flying over there. They weren't precise. Their accuracy was not precise, so they would be hitting it in London and places like that.
Well, they had a lot of bombing from airplanes.
Oh, the bombing was terrible. And they would bomb whole areas. People would run down in basements and cellars and subways and things like that. And after the bombing was, they had the sirens going off. After the bombing, people came up, cleaned up, and went about their business. The British people were very brave about that. It was extraordinary.
They had a lot of unexploded bombs.
Oh, yes. I suspect you could probably still find some around there now. The Britons tried something else, which was modestly, in fact, they put up big balloons. And these balloons would intercept V-2s coming over, and they would deflect some of them. And also, it would discourage airplane raids from the German coast. They would discourage it with these big balloons. But they were not, you couldn't call that a very good defense. They did everything they could.
Churchill was a very powerful leader.
Later, yes, during the war. After the war,
Spoke extremely well.
but after the war, they ignored him. They threw him out of office. It had nothing to do with him anymore. But there are rumors going around that when we were preparing for the invasion of the French coast, we pretended we were going to invade from several areas. And the Germans had to prepare for every area that they thought we were going to go through. And I understand there was one situation where we had a whole set of ships and soldiers and sailors. Everybody was prepared, and the Germans were also prepared because they had spies everywhere and they knew what we were doing. And so a lot of our soldiers and sailors got on ships preparing to go to France.
Calais.
But around there. But as they went out, there was nobody. They had no air force defending them. Nobody. And the Germans came in and slaughtered us. There was a very, very large loss of troops.
I don't understand. They were pretending to go to Calais.
So they were lining up with ships and people who lived
The Germans were lining up.
Well, no, the Americans and the British were lining up, pretending that they were going to board ships to go there, and
Right.
they did board ships. They did. Now, many people who lived along these border towns were evacuated. The British took them out. All the people got out of town. They emptied the towns, and the soldiers came in. The Germans were ready for these soldiers coming in. And now from what I read, that they were not really going to go at that time. They were just fainting, pretending they were going to go, and they got on ships and so forth. But the leadership of the American and British armies wasn't as great as a lot of people like you to think. These people were not that great. And so when the soldiers sailors got out into the water over the channel, they were slaughtered by the Germans. The German
Well,
At the Battle of the Bulge?
No. We're talking about D-Day.
No, I'm talking about long before D-Day.
Oh.
Preparation for D-Day.
Oh.
Preparation. And I only read about it very recently in one of the expose newspapers or something like that. The American Army doesn't talk about it. The British Army doesn't talk about it. And they...
Because, like, after World War I, people were so soured on war that there was, like, a big push not to get involved in World War II.
That's quite correct. There was a very strong isolationist movement in the country, and they didn't want to get involved at all. But this was a situation where Roosevelt felt that if we didn't do anything for them at that time, we were really in trouble. And so he devised a technique called Lend-Lease. He gave the British flotillas of not battleships, but the combat ships on a Lend-Lease basis with England. Now everybody knew that England could never pay for those ships, and many of them went down in subsequent wars, in subsequent fights. So it wasn't a great thing, but it helped the British. We also had our factories working, and I could say at that time, when many women came into the factories, many southern Afro-American people came up from the south and got jobs in the steel mills and the automobile mills and so forth. And they were perhaps the most productive society in history at that particular time. But eventually Roosevelt saw that the war, and we had to be in the war. He couldn't see any way to avoid it. And so
Pearl Harbor, we got in because we were attacked at
Pearl Harbor. Yes, but that was I think it was an excuse. If it wasn't Pearl Harbor, it would have been something else.
Well, that was the time, Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese invaded.
When they attacked Pearl Harbor.
Attacked.
Well, it was an interesting thing that the Japanese were in conference with the American representatives in Washington at the time of the attack. In other words, the Japanese were talking peace, they were talking arrangements and all kinds of things, and at the time they were talking all this, their Air Force and their fleets were en route to attack Pearl Harbor. And this was a situation which the Americans could never forgive them, because they said, the Japanese attacked us while they were still at peace with us, and they attacked us. It was a very, very horrible experience for the Americans. When they saw what happened, practically a whole fleet was wiped out. And when they saw what happened, the Americans became very angry. And at that time, there was no way we could stay out of any war. We were right in the middle of it. FDR spoke to the American people, and he spoke of that day as a day that will live in infamy. FDR was a very effective speaker, and when he used to have these night talks over the radio, the country listened. The country listened very closely because he was an impressive speaker.
Very powerful.
He had a wonderful crew of men around him, and these people were good advisors, and they knew they were intelligent people. He surrounded himself with a lot of intelligent people.
What were your experiences in the war? When did you go to Europe?
Well, we went somewhere a little shortly after D-Day.
You went from the United States to Europe?
We went to Europe. I think...
Wait, how did you react to being drafted, first of all?
Oh, it was an interesting thing. My older brother was, I think, a little too old for drafting. And I think he had 2 children anyhow, so he wouldn't be drafted. But my brother Sam and I were drafted. And my sister-in-law Edith's brother was drafted at the same time. All 3 of us were drafted from Boynton Avenue in the Bronx. We went down and we were examined by all kinds of doctors for various posts. My younger brother Sam was not accepted because when he was a young boy he had a severe injury of his leg. His leg was broken, and I think, if I remember correctly, they had a tough time with that leg. His leg was more or less being treated for a whole year, trying to get the leg to grow together. Finally it did. I think they put a silver ring in there to build up the height of the leg. And so when he came down for his induction board, they looked at his leg, and at that time the muscle was all gone because it was destroyed. So the skin covered an area, and the armed forces didn't like him. So he went from the Army to the Navy to the Air Force and the Marines. Nobody wanted my brother. They said he was too much of a physical risk. I think it's ironic because my brother used to play on the soccer team in New York City. He was a soccer player, and a very good one.